Before we begin the video, please subscribe to our channel Heroes for Animals so you won't miss any of the best stories about amazing dogs. The dog was limping every step it took, left a faint smear of blood across the pavement, some from its own paw, torn by the gravel, and some from the thing it was dragging behind. It wasn't just a shoe, it was a woman's sneaker, white, with a faded pink stripe and thick red stains on the toe. The laces were frayed and knotted around the dog's jaw, as if someone had tied them there in a desperate attempt to send a message at 4:47 a.m. fire station. 12 in Faro, a small wooded town in northern Oregon, was quiet. 2 firefighters were halfway through their shift, sipping burnt coffee and half listening to the hum of the dispatch radio. That's when they heard the scratching, barely audible at first, then the low, guttural whine. It wasn't the usual scratching of a stray animal begging for scraps. It was frantic, desperate. When Lieutenant Samri opened the door, he froze. Standing in the amber glow of the overhead lights was a German shepherd, matted, filthy, and shaking. Its ribs showed through its coat. But what held Sam's attention wasn't the dog's condition. It was the shoe in its mouth and the fact that the laces were soaked in blood. The dog dropped the shoe at Sam's feet, looked up, and barked once. Just once. It was sharp, urgent, and filled with something that made the hair on Sam's neck stand up. They didn't waste time. Within minutes, Sam and firefighter Carla Henderson were loading up the old forest rescue truck. The dog, against all protocol, leapt into the passenger seat and sat staring straight ahead like it knew exactly where to go. They didn't even ask questions. Something about the dog's eyes said more than words ever could. 10 minutes later, they reached the edge of the tree line behind Old Mill Road. It was a place no one went anymore, not since the fire 10 years ago that swallowed half the forest and left the rest of skeletal graveyard of blackened trees. But the dog leapt from the vehicle and bolted into the woods. Sam hesitated. "You sure we're following a dog into this?" Carla's voice was quiet. "Look at that shoe, Sam. You think it dragged that thing for nothing?" They followed at first. The trail was barely visible, only a slight depression in the overgrown moss, a few snapped branches, and every now and then another drop of red. The dog never looked back. It didn't bark, didn't whine. It moved like it was on a mission, like it was remembering every step it had taken before and now was retracing it with a purpose that burned in its bones about a mile in. They found the first piece of clothing, a torn sweater caught on a low branch. It was wet from dew and something darker. Carla picked it up with a gloved hand. "Female," she muttered. "Small, maybe teens or early 20s. Sam glanced at the dog. It had stopped ears, cricked forward, body stiff. Then it growled a low, barely audible sound and began moving again, faster now. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long orange shadows between the trees. And then the dog stopped dead in its tracks. There in a small clearing, choked with underbrush and old firesk, was a mound of leaves and debris. At first glance it looked like nothing, but the dog stepped forward, pawed gently, then looked back at them. Sam moved first. He crouched, brushed aside the leaves, and saw it, a hand, pale dirt, streaked, trembling, still alive. Carla dropped to her knees beside him. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The young woman's eyes fluttered open. Blood caked the side of her head. Her lips were cracked, and she whispered a single word. "Help!" Carla radioed in, her voice shaking. "This is Fire Station 12. We have a female, approximately early 20s, found unconscious with visible head trauma and signs of exposure. Immediate medical assistance required." Sam stared at the dog, who now sat quietly beside the woman, tail thumping softly against the earth. Its eyes, they weren't the eyes of a stray anymore. They were the eyes of a guardian. Paramedics arrived minutes later. The woman was rushed to County General. She was in bad shape, hypothermia, blood loss, blunt force trauma. But she was alive. Before the ambulance door closed, she grabbed Carla's arm and whispered something strange. There was another one, deeper in. They didn't know what it meant, but as the dog watched the ambulance drive away, it stood, turned, and began walking back into the woods. Sam exchanged a glance with Carla. "You think we follow?" she said. And without another word, they plunged deeper into the forest, chasing a stray German shepherd, with a blood-stained muzzle into a place no one dared to go for. Over a decade they had. No idea what waited for them there, but the dog did. And it wasn't done yet. The deeper they went, the quieter. It got no birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of their boots on the damp earth, and the soft pads of the dog moving ahead, focused like a soldier on patrol. Sam checked his radio again. Static, this far out the signal's weak. Carla said, "We're flying blind." Sam looked at the German shepherd, still limping slightly, still moving with that same relentless determination. "Not blind, we've got him." The dog paused near a fallen log, nose in the air. It sniffed twice, then turned sharply left and started pushing through thick brush without hesitation. They followed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. It wasn't until they climbed a small ridge half swallowed by moss and roots that they saw it. A shack, old abandoned, leaning to one side like it might collapse. If the wind blew too hard, the boards were grey with rot, the roof half caved in, and there were no windows, only dark slits covered in dirt and age. But the door, it had fresh scratches, deep ones like something had clawed to get in or out. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It sat by the door. And Wade Sam whispered, "That's not fear, that's sadness." Carla stepped forward, hand on the small flashlight clipped to her vest. "Should we go in?" Sam nodded. "We're here." No turning back now. He pushed the door. It creaked open, slowly, revealing stale air and darkness. Dust particles danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the broken roof. Then came the smell, iron rot, and something else. Something old and sour and human. Inside the room was almost empty. A metal chair bolted to the floor, a bucket in the corner, and ropes coiled and stained on the ground. But it was what sat in the center of the floor that made Carla gasp. Another shoe, smaller, child-sized blue, with a cartoon print blood smeared along the side. The dog stepped forward and gently nudged the shoe, then looked up at them. Its eyes were full of pain, of urgency. "There's another victim," Sam whispered a child before they could react. The dog suddenly stiffened, ears pricked toward the back of the shack. Then it growled deep, low, the kind of growl that didn't come from fear, but from fury. It bolted. Sam and Carla scrambled to follow, dodging under fallen beams and ducking branches as the dog raced around the shack and into the woods again. It wasn't random, it was tracking something. Someone. Carla was panting. "Now where is he taking us?" Sam didn't answer, but he knew one thing: the dog wasn't running anymore, it was hunting. The trail led them through denser forest, now thick with tangled vines and broken limbs. Several times they nearly lost sight of the dog, but it always waited just ahead, staring back as if to say, "Hurry, we're running out of time." And then suddenly it stopped. The clearing was small, barely a dozen feet wide, but it was clear something or someone had been there recently. A blanket, a water bottle, and beside them a backpack. Purple, torn at the strap, with a name stitched on the back. Emily. Carla's voice trembled. "She's real." Sam crouched by the blanket. It was still warm. She was here minutes ago, but where was she now? The dog sniffed the air again, then turned its head sharply toward the ravine just beyond the clearing. Without waiting, it bounded forward and disappeared down the slope. Sam and Carla followed. It was steep, muddy, slippery, and halfway down Carla's foot slipped. She tumbled, arms flailing, until something grabbed her jacket. Not Sam, the dog. Its teeth clenched the fabric, holding her just long enough for her to regain balance. When she finally reached the bottom, she looked at the animal, panting, still wounded, still refusing to quit. "You're not just a stray," she said softly. "You're a soldier." The ravine opened into another clearing, this one darker, more sheltered, and in the center, a girl, maybe 8, barefoot. Her knees scraped, face, pale eyes wide with terror. She was tied to a tree with fraying rope, and standing over her, a man, tall, thin, wearing a grey hoodie, his back to them. The dog growled loud, now furious. The man turned. He was holding something in his hand, a knife not raised, not yet. But his eyes, those were the eyes of someone who knew he'd been found. Sam drew his service weapon hands where I can see them. The man didn't move. The dog inched forward, teeth bared. Carla rushed to the girl knife already outsawing through the rope. The man's hand twitched, and that's when the German shepherd lummed. It was fast, brutal. A blur of fur and fury, the man cried out as the dog hit him square in the chest, sending him sprawling. The knife flew from his hand, Sam kicked it away and slammed a knee into the man's back. "Don't move!" he shouted, cuffing him. Carla had the girl free now, cradling her close. "Emily, sweetheart, you're safe now, you're safe." The girl clung to her, sobbing. The dog limped over to them, panting hard. Blood seeped from its paw again, but it pressed its head gently into Emily's side and let out a soft, broken whimper. Not from pain, from relief. They had found her. But what haunted Sam most as he stood there, guns still drawn, heart still pounding, was one thing: that dog had done all of this alone. No badge, no partner, no voice, just instinct and heart, and it had found her. They sat in the back of the ambulance, the girl wrapped in a foil blanket, shivering. Despite the warmth, her name was Emily Garcia, 8 years old, reported missing 3 days ago from a town over 40 meters away. Her photo had circulated online for days, but no one thought to look this deep into the woods. No one except the dog. The German shepherd lay beside her, now eyes closed, breathing heavy. The paramedics had treated his wounded paw, but there were older scars too, ones that told a story even more heartbreaking than the one they just lived. Sam stood by the side door, arms crossed, staring at the man who had taken her. His name was Walter Briggs, a 43-year-old transient with a record spanning 2 states, mostly petty theft, but with one glaring conviction from over a decade ago: unlawful confinement. He'd served 5 years. Apparently not enough. When they searched his shack, they found drawings, photos, maps, ropes, cans of food. But there was something else too, buried in a plastic bag beneath the floorboards, a collar, worn leather with a faded name tag. Axel. Carla turned it over in her hands. This belonged to the dog. Sam nodded slowly. "And I think I know what happened. They brought Emily to the hospital, and after hours of trauma screening and medical care, she finally opened up. Her voice was soft, fragile. He kept saying someone would come for me, that it wouldn't be long, that he had left the scent. I didn't understand what that meant until I saw the dog." Carla asked gently, "Did he ever hurt you?" Emily shook her head. "He just watched me, said he was waiting for someone, that they'd remember where to look. He was always muttering to himself." Sam exchanged a glance with Carla that didn't sound like someone who was simply trying to hurt a child. It sounded like someone waiting for something, or someone back at the precinct. Detectives dug deeper. Walter Briggs had once owned a dog, a trained canine reject named Axel, a German shepherd pulled from the academy after failing his obedience re-evaluation. But according to reports, the dog had disappeared 5 years ago during a domestic dispute between Briggs and his girlfriend. The girlfriend, Marissa Caldwell, was never found, just a trail of blood leading into the woods behind Briggs' property. The same woods they had just walked through. Carla sat in silence as the pieces fell together. "The bloody shoe, it wasn't Emily's," Sam answered slowly. "It was Marissa's." The realization hit like a freight train. The dog hadn't just found Emily. He had led them back to where it all began, back to the place he had lost someone, back to the place he had escaped from. 5 years ago, he hadn't been wandering aimlessly. He'd been waiting, watching, surviving near that fire station all these years, perhaps hoping someone would notice, perhaps even trying, before only to be ignored, until this time when he dragged that shoe through the town in a final desperate act. "And it worked," Carla whispered. "He brought her back because he couldn't save the first one." Sam nodded, eyes wet. And maybe this was his way of making it right. They brought cadaver dogs and a forensic team back into the woods the next morning. The search was quiet, methodical, heartbreaking, and in a shallow grave near the ravine, less than 40 feet from where Emily had been tied, they found the remains of Marissa Caldwell. DNA confirmed it days later, wrapped in her old sweater with dog hairs embedded in the fabric. Axel had been there when she died, and he had never left that night back at the fire station. Carla sat beside the dog, his coat finally clean, bandaged paw tucked under his chest. His eyes followed her, tired but gentle. She scratched behind his ear. "You were never lost, were you?" He licked her hand, once soft, almost like a thank you. They didn't know how he had survived out there for 5 years, how he had fed himself, hidden from danger, endured winters, and fought off predators. But somehow He had driven, not by instinct, but by something more: memory, grief, loyalty, and now redemption. By morning, word had spread. A stray dog had found a missing child in the woods and exposed the grave of a woman who had been gone for 5 years. The headlines didn't waste time. Hero dog leads rescue to missing girl and unsolved murder. Stray German shepherd uncovers dark forest secret. The dog who remembered people brought flowers to the fire station. Children drew pictures and left them taped to the front gate, most of them of a German shepherd standing like a knight in front of a little girl. But Axel didn't know any of that. He was still recovering. His paw was healing, but it was the trauma, years of isolation, the loss, the haunting memory of a woman he couldn't protect. That left the deeper wounds. Sam sat beside him in the back of the firehouse, flipping through a stack of papers. The DNA results, the incident report, a notarized document that stated clearly what had been determined by the sheriff's office. The dog formally registered as Axel had been presumed dead, but he was alive and by all counts still serving. Carla entered with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Sam, then knelt next to Axel. "He hasn't eaten much," she said softly. "Just water, and he won't let anyone else near him except us." Sam took a sip and looked down at the dog. He doesn't trust easily anymore. Carla nodded. "Can you blame him for the next few days?" They tried everything: vet visits, gentle exposure, even short walks through the perimeter of the woods to see if he'd want to return. But Axel would stop, halfway turn back, sit near the station door, as if saying, "I've already done enough out there." On the 4th day, a woman showed up at the firehouse. Her name was Dina Caldwell, Marissa's younger sister. She had driven in from Seattle the moment she heard the news. Her hands shook when she was handed the faded collar they had found beneath the shack floor. "This was his," she whispered. "She used to send me photos, said he never left her side. She'd had a rough relationship before. Walter Axel made her feel safe again." Her voice cracked. She would have never gone into the woods without him. Carla led her inside. Axel was resting on a blanket in the back, still stiff, alert. But the moment Dina entered, something changed. He lifted his head, stared, sniffed, and then slowly, achingly, he got up, limped across the floor, and pressed his head into her legs. Dina dropped to her knees. "Oh my God, Axel." He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just let out a breath, as if he had been holding it for 5 years that night. Dina asked a question that had hung in the air since day one. What happens now? There was silence for a long moment. Sam finally spoke. "We've had adoption offers, even from police departments out of state. People want to honor him. Some want to put him into service again." Carla looked over at Axel, who was now dozing next to Dina's chair. "He's done more than enough." Dina hesitated. "I take him, I want to, but I have 2 kids under 5 and I'm scared he's been through so much. I don't know if he's ready for that kind of life." Sam nodded. "We understand," so they called a meeting, the town council, the fire chief, a few trusted citizens who had helped during the search and rescue. They didn't want to put Axel through another round of trauma, not more kennels, not more strangers, but no one knew what he would choose until the next morning. It started just before sunrise. Carla arrived early to check on him, but the blanket was empty. She panicked, ran around the station, checked the gates, the side yard, and then she saw him. Axel was standing at the tree irontail, still staring into the forest, not moving, just watching. Carla walked over quietly, crouched beside him. "You want to go back?" He didn't respond, just kept staring into the woods. After a long pause, he turned his head toward her, then leaned in and pressed his nose gently into her hand, and just like that he limped back toward the station. "Back home," Carla whispered. "Okay, we'll stay. You've done enough out there." From that day forward, Axel became something more than a stray, more than a rescue dog. He became a symbol. The station built him a private space inside, complete with a bed, a window, and a small plaque that read, "Axel, the one who remembered." And every morning at the same time he would walk out to the edge of the woods, sit and stare for a few minutes, like he was remembering, not just what was lost, but what had finally been found. The trial didn't take long. Walter Briggs was charged with kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and second-degree murder. He sat emotionless through most of the proceedings, except for the moment when they showed the shoe, the one Axel had dragged for miles across broken brush and forgotten roads to the fire station door. His expression didn't change, but the room did. There was a silence that felt like thunder. Emily testified via recorded statement. She spoke softly, eyes wide, her words fragile but clear. He told me no one would find me. He said the dog would remember, that the forest remembers her father stood behind her on the screen, hand on her shoulder, a man broken by fear, but held together by love. And when the judge delivered the sentence, life without parole, there was no cheering. Only relief, only breath, finally released. Only tears. For Emily, recovery was slow. She had nightmares, flinched. At sudden noises refused to sleep alone, but her parents stayed close, her community wrapped around her like a blanket, and she began to draw again. One of her first pictures was of Axel. She drew him standing in front of her, nose, bloody eyes, sad but strong, his tail curled in a protective arc behind her. She titled it, "The Dog Who Found Me." Her therapist said it was her way of turning fear into strength every week. Emily would ask the same thing. Can I see him again? It took time, but eventually they said yes. The reunion happened on a crisp Sunday morning in November. They met at the fire station yard where the crew had set up a little bench, 2 cups of hot cocoa, and a blanket for Axel. Emily approached slowly, but he recognized her instantly. He didn't bark, didn't leap. He walked forward head low, then gently pressed it against her small chest, and she hugged him like a stuffed animal she'd lost and finally found for the first time in months. She smiled. 2 weeks later, the city held a ceremony. The mayor was there, news crews, firefighters in full uniform, but the most important part was unspoken. Axel stood beside Sam and Carla, his coat now clean and glossy, a new vest fitted to his frame. The fire chief stepped forward with a small wooden box and opened it. Inside, a medal of valor for courage, without command for loyalty, without leash for leading us when no one else could. Sam knelt beside Axel and clipped the metal gently onto his collar. He was never just a stray, he said. Into the microphone, he was waiting for us to listen. There wasn't a dry eye in the square that night after the lights had dimmed and the crowd had dispersed. Carla found Axel lying beside the fire truck, head on his paws, staring quietly into the darkened lot. She sat next to him, pulled a folded note from her pocket, and read aloud. It was from Emily. "Dear Axel, thank you for being brave when I was scared. Thank you for not forgetting I love you, Emily." Carla looked down. Axel's tail thumped once she smiled. I think that means he got the message. In the months that followed, Axel stayed at the firehouse. He became a permanent part of the team, not a working dog, but a watcher. A reminder, children would come by on Saturdays to visit veterans, sent letters, strangers left treats at the gate. And every morning, just before sunrise, Axel would do what he always did. He'd walk out to the tree-line, sit quietly and stare. No one knew exactly what he saw out there, whether it was the shadow of Marissa or the memory of his own long journey, but he never stayed long, just enough, just a moment to remember. Then he turned back, tail steady, head held high, because some heroes don't chase villains, they don't carry weapons, they don't speak, but they remember, they wait, they protect, and when the time comes, they lead us home. Axel did, and in doing so, he reminded everyone that sometimes the line between animal and angel is thinner than we think. The video of Axel receiving his medal reached over 8 million views. In 3 days, it had been posted by a firefighter's teenage son, who simply titled it, "He wasn't a stray, he was waiting." There was no dramatic music, no flashy edits, just raw footage. The moment Axel stood still while the metal was clipped onto his collar, the way he blinked slowly, like he didn't quite understand the meaning of it, but felt the weight anyway. The way the crowd stood in reverence. Silence, that silence more than anything, made it unforgettable. The internet responded like wildfire. Axel the hero. Dog began trending globally. Veterans groups shared the story, calling him one of our own parents, messaged Carla and Sam, saying they'd shared Axel's story with their kids at bedtime. A woman from Virginia wrote, "I showed this to my son, who's afraid of dogs. Now he wants to adopt one and name him Axel." A child in Germany mailed a hand-drawn picture of Axel in a superhero cape, leaping over trees with the word "Danke" scribbled in red crayon. Celebrities tweeted, news stations replayed the clip, but it was a handwritten letter that struck Carla most, from a man named Robert Henley, a former sheriff now in hospice care. It read, "In 47 years of service, I've seen good dogs, smart dogs, but never one who led us to truth by memory alone. That dog carries a soul." She kept that letter folded in her back pocket for weeks. But not all reactions were distant in Fairgrove. The small town where Axel first limped into the fire station that cold morning. Something shifted. People slowed down. They started walking their dogs more. They brought treats and left them in a small wooden box beside the station door with a hand-painted sign that simply said, "For Axel's friends." Local schools created an annual event, Axel Day, where children learned about animal empathy, rescue training, and loyalty. Axel himself, though, remained humble. He never sought attention, never responded to the cameras or the clapping or the crowds that occasionally gathered. He just watched, listened, protected. Especially one particular girl Emily visited often. She was healing more every day. Her laugh had returned, soft at first, then stronger, and with each visit her bond with Axel grew. She began writing stories, little ones about a brave dog who lived in a forest and rescued lost things, not just people but memories, secrets, and even time itself. In one of them she wrote, "The dog didn't bark much, but he remembered everything he knew. When someone was lying, he knew. When the wind carried danger, and when he looked at you, you told the truth without meaning to." Her parents framed it. When Emily presented it to the fire crew one afternoon, Axel walked over and sat beside her, his head resting gently on her knee. Carla whispered, "I think he knows it's about him." Emily smiled. "It always is." But one day, someone unexpected returned, a man with tired eyes and rough hands. He wore a jacket with a faded animal shelter patch. His name was Doug, and he'd worked at the regional pound 5 years ago, the same one Axel had escaped from during the night of the domestic disturbance at Walter's cabin. "I was on duty when he broke the fence." Doug said, "We thought he ran off scared. I chased him for 3 blocks before I lost him. I've carried that with me ever since." Sam listened. Quietly, Doug's eyes reened. "I didn't think a dog could carry something that long, that kind of pain, that kind of loyalty." Carla looked at Axel, sleeping soundly in the corner. "After a long day, you were wrong," she said gently. "But he forgives you." Doug nodded, wiping his face. "I think he forgives all of us that night." Carla sat outside with Axel. The sky was clear, filled with stars. She sipped tea while Axel lay beside her, his breathing calm, his eyes half-closed but alert. "You did something no one else could," she whispered. "You remembered, and you didn't give up." Axel didn't move, just let out a slow, deep sigh and laid his head on her foot. Sometimes the stories that reach the world are the ones that speak without shouting, the ones that whisper truths so quietly they echo longer than anything loud ever could. Axel's story was one of those, not just of a rescue, but of remembrance, of choosing not to let pain define him, but to turn it into purpose, of leading people, not just into the woods, but out of the darkness. It had been almost a year. The leaves had turned golden again, the mornings crisp and the firehouse quieter than usual. Axel had slowed down just a little. His steps more measured, his eyes softer, but his presence undiminished. He still greeted the crew each morning, still watched over Emily during her visits, walking beside her like a silent guardian, still sat by the tree iron just before sunrise, gazing into the woods with the same quiet stillness he always had. But something had changed, and everyone felt it. One morning, Carla found a folded note on the bench outside the firehouse. No name, just a child's handwriting, and a small drawing of a dog and a little girl holding hands under a star. It read, "Dear Axel, if you ever have to leave, that's okay. I'll remember just like you did. Love, Emily." Carla sat there for a long time after reading it. Axel was lying under the bench tails, slowly tapping the ground, eyes half closed but listening. She reached down, touched his collar, and whispered, "She's ready." Axel didn't move, but somehow she knew he heard her. A few weeks later, on the first snow of the season, something rare happened. Axel didn't get up with the sunrise. He didn't walk to the tree line. He didn't greet the crew. He simply rested, curled in his bed by the fire truck, warm and still, his breathing steady but deep. The vet had told them this might happen, that dogs like Axel, who carried more than just physical scars, often knew when their time had come. They didn't fade. They chose their moment, and Axel had chosen peace. That afternoon, Sam, Carla, and Emily gathered around him. Emily wore a red scarf, the same one Axel had once tugged playfully during a spring walk. She knelt beside him and laid a small box on the floor inside her, drawing folded neatly. "It's yours now," she whispered. Axel blinked once. His tail gave a soft thump. Then he let out a long, slow breath, and he was gone. The town mourned. They lit candles outside the station, left dog treats, letters, flowers, even a child's shoe, symbolic and tear-stained. At sunset, Carla climbed to the top of the hill, behind the woods, where they had once followed him through broken trees and forgotten trails there, beneath a tall pine. They buried him, no headstone, just a plaque carved into the wood. Axel, the one who remembered, the one who returned. But Axel's story didn't end there that spring. The town built a small park where the woods once stood thick with fear. They called it Memory Grove. There was a path named Axel's Trail, and at the heart of it, under that tall pine, sat a stone bench where people could sit and listen to the wind. Sometimes Emily would visit after school, sit quietly, draw, and once in a while she would look toward the trees and smile, because she still remembered the final letter. Came weeks later. Carla opened her mailbox to find a small envelope with a paw print sticker inside, a note from the mayor's office, and a sealed certificate, posthumous recognition of valor to Axel for extraordinary service in the protection of life, recovery of truth, and unwavering loyalty to those who needed it most. She framed it, hung it beside his old collar, and every day before she left the station, she'd glance at it and whisper the same 3 words, "Thank you, Axel." Because sometimes the greatest rescue isn't from a place, it's from the silence we carry, the guilt we bury, the pain we don't speak. Axel found people not just in the woods, but in their wounds, and in doing so, he healed more than he'll ever know. He didn't need words, he remembered, and now, so will we.